The Watcher by Reeves Wiedemann, updated September 19th, 2022, in The Cut, Part 1. A family bought their dream house, but according to the creepy letters they started to get, they weren't the only ones interested in it. In November, New York Magazine published The Watcher, which chronicled the New Jersey families being stalked by a mysterious, threatening letter writer. The article by Reeves Wiedemann is the basis of an upcoming Netflix limited series created by Ryan Murphy. One night in June, Derek Brodus had just finished an evening of painting at his new home in Westfield, New Jersey. When he went outside to check the mail, Derek and his wife, Maria, had closed in on a six-bedroom house in Boulevard 3 days earlier and were doing some renovations before they moved in, so there wasn't much in the mail except a few bills and a white card-shaped envelope. It was addressed in thick, clunky handwriting to the new owner, and the typed note inside began warmly. "Dearest new neighbor at Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." For the Broduses, buying 657 Boulevard had fulfilled a dream. Maria was raised in Westfield, and the house was a few blocks from her childhood home. Derek grew up working class in Maine, then moved his way up the ladder at an insurance company in Manhattan to become a senior vice president with a salary large enough to afford a $1.3 million house. The Broduses had bought Boulevard just after Derek celebrated his 40th birthday, and their three kids were already debating which of the house fireplaces Santa Claus would use. But as Derek kept reading the letter from his new neighbor, it took a turn. "How did you end up here?" the writer asked. "Did Boulevard call you with its force within?" The letter went on. "657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." The author's reconnaissance had apparently already begun. The letter identified the Brothers' Honda minivan, as well as the workers renovating the home. "I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be," the person wrote. "Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make Boulevard unhappy." Earlier in the week, Derek and Maria had gone to the house and chatted with their new neighbors while their children, who were 5, 8, and 10 years old, ran around the backyard with several kids from the neighborhood. The letter writer seemed to have noticed. "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted," the anonymous correspondent wrote, before asking if there were more on the way. "Do you need to fill the house with young blood?" I requested. "Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family, or was it agreed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to." The envelope had no return address. "Who am I?" the person wrote. "There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows. You could see them from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look at any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard. At all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one." The letter concluded with a suggestion that his message would not be in his last. "Welcome, my friends, welcome." Let the party begin, followed by a signature typed in a cursive font, "The Watcher." It was after 10 p.m., and Derek Brodus was alone. He raced around the house, turning off lights so no one could see inside, then called the Westfield Police Department. An officer came to the house and read the letter and said, "What is this?" He asked Derek if he had any means and recommended moving a piece of construction equipment from the back porch in case the Watcher tried to toss it through a window. Derek rushed back to his wife and kids, who were living at their old home elsewhere in Westfield. That night, Derek and Maria wrote an email to John and Andrea Woods, the couple who sold them 657 Boulevard, to ask if they had any idea who the Watcher might be or why he or she had written. "I asked the Woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened." Andrea Woods replied the next morning, a few days before going out. The Woods had also received a letter from the Watcher. The note had been odd, she said, and made similar mention to the Watcher's family observing the house over time. But Andrea said she and her husband had never received anything like it in their 23 years in the house, and had thrown the letter away without much thought. That day, the Woods went with Maria to the police station, where Detective Leonard Lew told her not to tell anyone about the letters, including her new neighbors, most of whom she had never met, and all of whom were now suspects. The Broduses spent the coming weeks on high alert. Derek canceled a work trip, and whenever Maria took the kids to their house, she would yell at their names if they wandered into a corner of the yard. When Derek gave a tour of the renovation to a couple block, he froze when the wife said, "It'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood." The Broduses' general contractor arrived one morning to find that a heavy sign he'd hammered into the front yard had been ripped out overnight. 2 weeks after the letter arrived, Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check the mail. She recognized the thick black lettering on the card-shaped envelope and called the police. "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard," the watcher wrote. "The workers have been busy, and I have been busy. I've been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time, they will." This time, the watcher had addressed Derek and Maria directly, misspelling their names as Mr. and Mrs. Brodus. Had the watcher been close enough to hear one of the Brodus' contractors addressing him, the watcher boasted of having learned a lot about the family and 3 kids by the birth order and by their nicknames. The ones Maria had been yelling. "I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me," it said. "You certainly say their names often." The letter asked about one child in particular, whom the writer had been using an easel inside an enclosed porch. "Is she the artist of the family?" The letter continued. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very, if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear the scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the watcher, and I've been in control of the boulevard better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession, and now you are too, Brodus' family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to Boulevard, and now it has brought to you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. Derek and Maria stopped bringing their kids to the house. They were no longer sure when or if they would move in. Several weeks later, a 3rd letter arrived. "Where have you gone to?" the watcher wrote. 657 Boulevard is missing you. Many Westfield residents compare their town to Mayberry, the idyllic setting for the Andy Griffith Show. The kind of place where a new neighbor might greet you with a welcoming note. Westfield is 45 minutes from New York and a bit too slow for singles. Many of the town's 30,000 residents are largely well-to-do families. This year, Bloomberg ranked Westfield the 99th richest city in America, but only the 18th wealthiest in New Jersey. And in 2014, when the watcher struck the website at Neighborhood Scout, named it in the country's 30th safest town. The most pressing local issues of late, according to residents, have been the temporary closure of Trader Joe's after a roof collapse and the rampant scourge of unconstitutional policy, by which they mean aggressive parking enforcement. Westfield is 86% white. One activity all locals recognize as treacherous is trying to buy a house. There are a lot of money and a lot of ego, one resident who requested an anonymity before discussing Westfield real estate told me. I've seen bidding wars where friends lost by $300,000. The Brodus' house was on the boulevard, a wide tree-lined street with some of the more desirable homes in town, as the watcher had noted. The boulevard used to be the street to live on. You made it if you lived on the boulevard. Built in 1905, 657 Boulevard was perhaps the grandest home on the block, and when the Woods put it on the market, they had received multiple offers above their asking price. That led the Brodus to initially suspect that the watcher might be someone upset over losing out on the house. But the Woods said one interested buyer had backed out after a bad medical diagnosis, while another had already found a different home. In an email to the Brodus, Andrea Woods proposed another theory. Would the mention of the contractor trucks and your children suggest that it was someone in their neighborhood? The letter did not indicate proximity. They had been processed in Kearney, the U.S. Postal Service's distribution center in northern New Jersey. The first was postmarked June 4th, before the sale was public. The Woods had never put up a for sale sign, and only a day after the contractors arrived, the renovations were mostly interior. And people who lived nearby say they didn't notice an unusual commotion, even from the jackhammering in the basement. When Derek and Maria walked Detective Lugo around the house, they showed him that the easel on the porch was hidden from the street by vegetation, making it difficult to see unless someone was behind the house or right next door. A few days after the letter, Maria and Derek went to a barbecue across the street, welcoming them. Another new owner to the block. Brodus hadn't told anyone about the watcher, as the police had instructed, and found themselves scanning the party for clues, while keeping tabs on their kids, who ran gillously through a crowd that made up much of the much of the suspect pool. We kept creeping at them to stay close, Maria said. People must have thought we were crazy. At one point, Derek was chatting with John Schmidt, who lived 2 doors down, when Schmidt told him about the Langfords who lived between them. Peggy Langford was in her 90s, and several of the adult children, all in their 60s, lived with her. The family was a bit odd, Schmidt said, but harmless. He described one of the younger Langfords, Michael, who didn't work and had a beard like Ernest Hemingway, as a kind of Boo Radley character. Derek thought that the case was solved. The Langford house was right next to the easel on the porch. The family had lived there since 1960s, when the Watcher father, the letterman, had begun observing 657 Boulevard. Richard Langford, the family patriarch, had died 12 years earlier, and the current Watcher claimed to have been on the job for the better part of 2 decades. When the Burgesses told Lugo about the family, he said he already knew, and a week after the first letter arrived, he brought Michael Langford to the police headquarters for an interview. Michael denied knowing anything about the letters, but the Burgesses say that Lugo told him that the narrative of what he said matched things mentioned in the letters. This isn't CSI Westfield, Lugo later told the Burgesses. When the wife is dead, it's the husband. But there wasn't much hard evidence, and after a few weeks, the police had told the Burgesses that short of an admission, there wasn't much the department could do. This is someone who threatened my kids, and the police are saying probably nothing going to happen. Derek said, probably isn't good enough for me. And after a second letter, Derek told the cops that if they didn't take care of the situation, they would have a different kind of case on their hands. This person attacked my family and where I'm from. If you do that, you get your ass beat, Derek told me. Frustrated, the Burgesses began their own investigation. Derek became especially obsessed. He set up webcams at 657 Boulevard and spent nights crouched in the dark, watching to see if anyone was watching the house at close range. Maria thought I was crazy. He told me recently he had a coffee shop in Manhattan where he covered a table with documents relating to the case, including copies of the letter, which he and his wife had shared with only few friends and family members. He showed me a map displaying when each of the 657's neighbors had moved in. Langfords were the only ones there since the 1960s, with overlay markings, possibly slight lines in the easel, and a circle for approximate range of earshot to estimate who might have heard Maria yelling their kid's name. Only a few homes fit both criteria. The Burgesses also turned to several experts. They employed a private investigator who staked out the neighborhood and ran background checks on the Langfords, but didn't find anything noteworthy. Derek reached out to the former FBI agent who served as an inspiration for Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs. They were on the high school board of trustees together, and they also hired Robert Lenihan, another former FBI agent, to conduct a threat assessment. Lenihan recognized several old-fashioned ticks in the letters that pointed to an older writer. The envelope was addressed to M.M. Bredis. The salutations included a day's weather, warm and humid, sunny and cool for a summer day, and the sentences had double spaces between them. The letters had a certain literary panache, which suggested a voracious reader, and a surprising lack of profanity, given the level of anger which Lenihan thought meant a less macho writer. Maybe he wondered the Watcher had seen The Watcher, starring Keanu Reeves as a serial killer who stalks detective trying to catch him. Lenihan didn't think The Watcher was likely to act on threats, but the letters had enough typos and errors to imply certain erraticisms. The first letter was dated Tuesday, but that the day was Wednesday. There was also a seething anger directed at the wealthy in particular. The Watcher was upset by new money moving into the town. Are you one of those Hoboken transplants who are ruining Westfield? And the Burgesses' relatively modest reservations. The house is crying from all the pain it's going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You're stealing it. Its history. Its cries for the past and what used to be in the time when I roamed its halls. 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from room to room imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father, but he kept watching until the day he died. And now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again. Lenihan recommended looking into former housekeepers or descendants. Perhaps the Watcher was jealous that the Burgesses had bought a home that the writer couldn't afford. But the focus remained on the Langfords. In cooperation with the Westfield police, the Burgesses sent out a letter to the Langfords announcing plans to tear down the house, hoping to prompt a response. Nothing happened. Detective Lugo brought Michael Langford in for a second interview, but got nowhere, and his sister Abby accused the police of harassing her family. Eventually, the Burgesses hired Lee Levitt, a lawyer who met with several members of the Langford family, as well as their attorney, to show them the letters, along with the photos explaining how their home was one of the few vantage points from which the easel could be seen. The meetings grew tense. Levitt told him, and Langford's insisted Michael was innocent. One night, Derek had a dream in which he confronted Peggy, the eldest Langford. and demanded she build an 8-foot fence between the properties. This is the end to part 1 of The Watcher.